Up next, we have our second panel of the day. Panel I've been, quite anxiously waiting to listen to. We bring in Dipti back as a moderator. Girish will be joining us as well. I have two new speakers, who will be part of this panel. Let me first introduce David Simmons. He's the CTO and co-founder overseeing Ahana's technology strategy and drives most of the product innovation. And he has been in the industry for a long, long time. If you want to jump over to the speaker page and see all the exciting work David has done in the field of databases, and now his focus on making Presto better would be very exciting. And the other speaker I also wanted to introduce, panelist for this session, is Bishwa. Bishwa and I work at Facebook. Bishwa has been, he's the tech lead for a bunch of products, Presto, Spark, streaming at Facebook, which is what we call as the data infrastructure compute engines. And he is looking at various modernization efforts at Facebook. So Dipti, I will let you take over the panel from here and get some interesting insights from all our wonderful panelists. And Girish, I didn't reintroduce you, but because you were here earlier in the day as well. But for folks who have maybe joined later, Girish not only is the chair of the Presto Foundation, but also the tech lead for the Presto project for Uber. So over to you, Dipti.
All right, thanks, Amit, for the introductions. Great to be back on. Bishwa, Girish, and Dave. Looking forward to this discussion. We had an ecosystem panel earlier in the day, and it was quite fun talking about how broad Presto is and the ecosystem around it, connectors, layers on top, layers below. But this one is, when we were talking earlier, is about the core engine, right? The innovation that's happening at the heart of the engine, and the innovation that's happening across multiple different companies as well. I think all of you, you don't need any additional introductions. So let's dive right into one of the first questions. 6 months ago we had a discussion, and there's a lot that's happened in that time frame, in that period of time. Maybe each of you can share a little bit about what's changed, something that you have been really excited about that's been delivered in the past 6 months, something that's created a lot of impact. Girish, let's start off with you. Maybe share a little bit more about Presto at Uber and the things that are exciting, the game-changing things that are happening.
Sure. Thanks, Dipti. Thanks for all the introductions. And hey, David and Biswa. Nice to see you both again in this panel. At Presto, at Uber, we've been focusing primarily on using Presto as an interactive engine. But over the last year, or 2020, we started off introducing this new product of being able to run ETL workloads on Presto. So we started out just before PrestoCon, and we just launched it for full usage around the same time. Over the last 6 months, we've seen amazing adoption of that. Right, so people are using it across the board. They're using it for all kinds of use cases. It's pretty amazing to see. So that is certainly one big success story I wanted to call out. The other thing we've been doing is we've been trying to establish Presto SQL, the SQL layer of Presto, as the de facto SQL for most data analytics use cases at Uber. And towards that, we've been working to port Presto SQL to platforms like Flink and Spark. On the Spark side, the Facebook guys have done amazing work. So we did a successful POC of the stuff they put out. We're very happy. We're waiting for GA before we launch it. On the Flink side, there are some interesting early results. We'll probably be sharing in future meetups. So that's cool stuff from Uber side on Presto.
It's great. It's open source in action, right? Someone contributes in the innovation, and everyone else gets to use it. So, Bishwa, why don't you go next and maybe share about things that you've been excited about that have gone into production or have been delivered over the last 6 months?
Sure. Well, I think the two big ones, I would say, in terms of stuff that has landed well. One of them is the RaptorX effort. This is kind of the new set of enhancements to Presto that makes Presto significantly faster by deploying all sorts of techniques around, caching data, caching partial results. A lot of the stuff, by the way, Alibaba people talked about earlier today, right? Smarter metadata caching, data caching, partial result caching, all that, getting loose affinity. So basically you have the benefits of disaggregated storage, but the performance of co-located, which is kind of really kind of a dream combo, right? If you think about it, and that's what we're going towards. I think RapidX is a very good step in that direction. James talked about that earlier this morning for those who were there in quite a bit of detail. And the other one, which has just started landing, just going back to Girish's point about ETL, right? So we had this Presto LBM, right, where we were able to run large queries by materializing intermediate stages. Now we have Presto on Spark, which I'm very excited about because it actually allows you to run arbitrarily large petascale queries using the exact same Presto set of features and semantics and language, but leverages under the hood the Spark distributed runtime, and that gives you a host of advantages. It allows you to leverage elastic compute better, allows you to size containers depending on the job, because it achieves much better isolation. You can run jobs for days and not fail because there is checkpointing at the individual task level. And I believe that this essentially takes the ETL use case of Presto to the next level. And I'm very excited about where that particular project is going to go.
Girish and I talked earlier in the day about how the next phase of the Presto option is really around strategic replatforming, right? And that comes with starting with one use case and then another and another, and essentially expanding the platform to multiple use cases. So that's great to hear. Dave, you've been in the database space for a while. What have you seen in the past 6 months? Perhaps share some perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, I joined this community about actually 7 months ago. So I've been building closed proprietary enterprise data warehouse systems for I don't want to say how long, but it's like 3 decades. Like that. But what gets me excited is, and it's not new. I guess it's not new for everyone here, but it's new for me. It's sort of this emerging architectural pattern that is sort of looking to, let's say, augment the proprietary enterprise data warehouse by enabling query transactions, data management capabilities directly on cloud data that's residing in sort of these open formats. And so there's huge advantages to that because otherwise data is sort of locked into these proprietary systems. So the term lakehouse, and Gartner's coined the term accelerated analytics for this pattern. So what's new is, so I'm excited by the launch of Ahana, which we launched in December of this year, with GA in December of this year, which sort of fits into this accelerated analytics architecture. And so there's a lot of interesting challenges there from a technical perspective. What we're trying to do is provide the equivalent of a fully featured data management system for the data lake. And it sort of opens up a lot of challenges, like the first one being that we're, unlike a closed system, we're trying to build this fully featured system with a disaggregated stack of open services, such as those for metadata, for transactions, for security. And these services are largely shared across the various analytical engines that are in this accelerated environment. And then the other challenge, obviously, is that the data is ETL directly into the data lake. So it's the various analytical engines, including ours, has to sort of live with these open table layouts and file formats. So there may be some interesting innovations that we'll do there to deal with any suboptimality in the data layout. And obviously we've chosen Presto DB as to provide the analytical SQL capabilities to this environment. So it's got great capabilities for analyzing these open data layouts and formats, and a really compelling technical roadmap that we're collaborating on, and a strong group of technologists like Girish and Biswa and his team. So yeah, PrestoCon is doing a great job of highlighting all these various aspects. So in short, I'm super excited about our launch, and that was the thing that sort of happened in the last months.
Yeah, and I want to share a little bit on the community side, right? We have seen a lot of great contributions. So today, Twitter talked about the iceberg connector, and we're seeing that there are a lot more formats, whether they're table formats, whether they are more on the transaction manager, data management side. There are a range of different options that are out there. Apache Hoodie, we had a couple of, we talked about it. Uber extensively uses it, and it's really good to see some of those being merged in and really being integrated with Presto. The other aspect is security, and security is we've seen good progress in a couple of different ways. So it's obviously you need integration with existing tools that are in the ecosystem, like Ranger for fine-grained access control, but also in the cloud. The cloud is it's a whole new paradigm, and what works there and the paradigms with AWS are sometimes very different with from the on-prem world, right? And so there's been a lot of good support added to AWS specific aspects as well, from S3 improvements, IAM improvements from a security perspective, and that's been really phenomenal to see. So yeah, it's been a good 6 months. It sounds like a lot has happened in the 6 months that since we talked last. Now, there are other projects. It was funny, we were talking about this earlier. As an end user, as a data platform engineer, there are many choices today. There are closed source choices, there are open source choices, there's do-it-yourself, there's managed services. It used to be a world where there was Oracle, IBM, and Microsoft SQL Server, and life was easy. But now there are a lot of other options. And so let's talk a little bit about why a data platform engineer would pick Presto, right? What are the from your perspectives, perhaps why did you pick it and investing in it for your companies, and putting yourselves in the end user shoes? Why should they? What is in Presto that they may not get with other options that are out there? So maybe Girish, you can Bishwa, you can get started with this one, and we'll go around.
Well, I think I can think of a few things. One big one, obviously, is it's not a very obvious feature, right? But one of the things that we do at Facebook is that we run literally like tens or even hundreds of millions of queries on Presto and Spark. Like, one of the things that we get, or rather the community gets, is I think this benefit of really, really exascale testing. Like, over the last 2 years, we have essentially scaled Presto 10x. And we have tested Raptor X with like petascale, multi-petascale, with highly complex workloads. We have gone into the depths of org and kind of tuned the codecs for example, extremely deeply nested repeated structured data, right? Arrays and maps and all those kind of things, right? We have heavily invested. I think like really, really complex. Like, we have queries that have literally 100 joins, right? We have queries that are like, the query string is megabytes in size, right? And as the data model of Facebook is extremely complex. So we have done this is like, over the last 1.5 years, we have done a really extensive set of things about how to make like every correctness problem is like a step 0 at Facebook, right? So this volume of testing that has gone over the last several years, I think, and we continue to 2x, 3x every year, I think this is a huge value add that Presto provides, and it is kind of hard to underestimate the value. Like, Oracle literally has like hundreds of people working on like millions of queries trying to get this kind of thing going, right, for use. So I would say that so that's a big one. And obviously the other use case is that because we are testing the limits of Presto, like if you look at the spectrum of like thousands or even tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of queries, of really, really tiny queries, all the way to, we just referred to this batch job that is going to run for days on Presto and Spark, right? And we are trying to make Presto cover this entire spectrum, right? And of course, there is the other side of the spectrum, like how many connectors we have. Like, we can talk to pretty much a lot of these different file formats, databases. So the surface area of coverage, both in terms of this spectrum of use cases and the amount of data and the type of data we have handled, I think it's kind of hard to get. Like if you take examples of Oracle, Microsoft, I think they can kind of only dream of the kind of depth and kind of breadth of the coverage we have, right? And we are getting continuously better. Like our pace, if anything, is accelerating. So I would say those are the two. Like we'll talk about later, Velox and all the cool like native code acceleration. Like we are investing in, a lot of the other people in the community are investing in. So I would say those are the main things.
Yeah, great point. Girish, do you just leave it to Facebook to do all the testing, or what is your perspective on it?
Yeah, I agree with Biswa that resiliency and reliability, those are basically the cornerstones why we've chosen Presto, right? So as I mentioned before, we were talking about this four-phase development and about how you adopt Presto within your individual organization, right? So at some point you'll start hitting scale, and when you start hitting scale, everything else becomes secondary, because when people start depending on Presto for getting their job done and it goes down, you're going to hear about it, right? And they're going to scream because now people's jobs are blocked. So for us, I don't think there is another comparable engine on the market in the open source space which gives us the kind of guarantees that we get with Presto releases at Facebook, right? Yes, I mean, the features are important, but I want to be confident that if I deploy something on the download of the web and put it out to my thousands of users, I'm confident that I will not run into problems. Of course, I mean, Facebook does most of the work. We still have to do some additional work here because we use different technologies like Parquet and things like that. So we do some additional testing on our side, but the stability, the scale, those kind of things, I think, are sussed out by the Facebook testing process. Another thing I wanted to bring up very quickly. I think it's good to put yourself in the shoes of a data engineer here, right? So if, for instance, if you're a software engineer, your development processes, you pull up an IDE, you try out some code, you write some unit tests on the side, you test it out, and then you do some development, and then you finally put it into staging and then production, and then that's your process, right? If you're a data engineer, it's a similar process, right? You first start with your SQL, you try it out on some small data sets. You explore the data, and then you figure out what is the SQL you want to push. And then you hit your button and it goes to production. Now that production could be a big Spark job, it could be an always on streaming pipeline on Flink, let's say, or it could be like a high QPS query that you're putting on some external facing dashboard, right? For all these use cases, the development starts with a data engineer or data scientist sitting with a query builder type interface, and doing some basic Presto queries.
Right.
And I think from my point of view, that's the reason, right? Like if people are starting with Presto, you want to make sure that they can go all the way. They don't have to move to another platform and they need to hit production order. So that's another reason why I think it's important for us to invest in Presto.
Dave, anything more to add to that?
I would, yeah, I mean, obviously Presto is a great distributed, ANSI SQL implementation. It's got support for everything you need to run, TPCDS, Facebook's running it at, interactive SQL at the scale of multi-thousands of servers and multi-petabytes of data. So Biswa mentioned all that stuff. Highly optimized for, for ORC and Parquet data. So I would imagine a platform engineer will likely be looking to build out sort of their own open data lake-based accelerated analytics environment, which is comprised of a bunch of shared services and best-of-breed analytical engines. So, so there's all the great stuff that Facebook's doing and Uber, and we'd like to collaborate with the deep tech. But then there's companies like Ahana that are looking to build the integrations for these types of accelerated analytics environments with the different types of metadata services. You mentioned security services like Ranger earlier, transactional services like Hoodie. So it's going to, so the combination of, all this performance and scalability work, and then all the integrations that will sort of enable Presto to work in this sort of accelerated analytics environment, I think over the next 12 to 18 months, and there's no better choice than sort of Presto DB for this type of platform engineer. Right?
Yeah, and there's, I think, a big one is just the future roadmap, right? And there's a few questions around some of these things. There's a question around resiliency. When a worker node going down, and I know I've had this conversation with some of you here, where it's like, oh, okay, can we get more fault tolerance with intra query that allows allows us to really use the power of the cloud and scale up, scale down in any way, right? So maybe Bishwa, talk a little bit about that. And I think you've answered it. Anything more to add on the fault tolerance?
No. As I said, I think this is our top of our mind. Like we have very similar things at Facebook. Like we have this project called OPEC that is essentially about how do we bring like spot instances or elastic instances, as we say, right? And today we have kind of the solution where we bring up and down, clusters on the fly based on certain parameters, and it kind of works, but not really. And this is actually one of the most important things we want to do. And as I said in the response to the question, with Presto and Spark, you kind of get that, right?
Yeah.
For ETL long running workloads, where it is the most important, really. Like, I mean, if you have a 1 minute job, you can just retry the query, right? It's a lot cheaper to do that. If you have a 10-hour job, then you just can't retry. So, but we actually do want to bring it, because apart from the fact that today the problem is not only just resilience, the problem is actually at the other end of the spectrum. Because if you want to get very low latency, you need to be able to speculatively retry individual tasks in multiple workers. And I recommend everybody reads the Tail at Scale paper by Jeff Dean. It has a really fantastic explanation of why low latency requires speculative execution, right? So we do want to bring this to classic Presto, and I do believe this will be a significant improvement in terms of actually improving the latency of interactive job, funnily enough, right? So it actually works in both sides of the spectrum. So yeah, we are definitely going to work on this.
That's great. Now, in terms of the ecosystem, let's talk a little bit about the extensions, right? So there's the core engine. We talked a little bit about that. We've discussed RaptorX today, a little bit about ARIA. Are there other extensions that you're looking at building, adding on to what already exists on Classic Presto? And maybe we can have a discussion around that. Dave, do you want to get started on this one first, perhaps, or Girish?
What was the question?
The extensions on Presto, around Presto?
Yeah, I mean, for us, I think it's sort of what I said earlier, right? The challenge for us is to provide, capabilities like ACID transactions, data versioning, auditing, indexing, caching, cost performance, scalable core optimization execution via this disaggregated stack of services, right? So one set of integrations that we hope to bring to it is sort of, like we contributed the Apache Ranger plugin as an example recently to the community. So we'll look to make extensions to provide capabilities like snapshot isolation, time travel, maybe ultimately rewrite transactions by exploiting services like Hoodie. We come at it from a public cloud perspective. So, extension to the Hive connector and RaptorX to fully utilize the full IO bandwidth of cloud object stores like S3. Using prefetching and parallel I/O, so we'll help add performance extensions to the existing connectors. So those are sort of the examples of some of the things I think that we'll be investing in over time, over the next 12 to 18 months.
That's great. Girish?
Yeah, sure. So from Uber side, I think one area of investment is around making Presto as the de facto data analytics ecosystem, right? And so what it means is you write your Presto SQL query right out on the classic Presto, and then you're able to hit it to production in one of different ways. So we've already done some work on putting Presto for low latency, high QPS queries on top of Pinot, Apache Pinot. And we're working with the Pinot community on that and adding additional features like upsearch, joins, all this kind of stuff. So that is one area. The other area is when we talk about production at Uber, predominantly these jobs are essentially long-running streaming jobs, right? Like that's what we care about, real-time, end-to-end. And a lot of that workload runs on Apache Flink. So as of today, people basically write jobs using either Java on Flink, or Flink comes out of the box with a calset SQL support. What we want to do is we want to take Presto SQL and be able to run these as Flink jobs. So that's another area we're investing in. And also Presto on Spark, the stuff that Facebook folks are working on. We tried it out, we love it, we want to partner and do more stuff. So that's those are the areas we're currently looking at.
All right. Vishwa, anything more to add to that from an ecosystem perspective?
Well, I think this is all this is stuff is great. I think I'm really excited. One thing I wanted to point out is that I think a convergence angle is kind of important. Like this the fact that we all need kind of this DMLs and kind of rich types and all of this stuff, right? And one of the challenges we have is that it is not all about Presto. Like for example, the file format we use, the metastore that we use, so metastore is a big one, is really gets in the way because you have to, a lot of these actually require like materialized views. You can't really do a good job with materialized views unless you have a very tight integration with metastore. Same with real-time data, same with, so one of the things I'm really looking forward to is to how do we expand this collaboration where we can build this, and this is where, like Databricks and Snowflake have a lot of advantage because they own and control the ecosystem through, Delta or through Snowflake's own like Foundation DB based metastore or whatever, that they can build these features much more quickly and much more efficiently. So this closed ecosystem, but that doesn't mean that the ecosystem has to be closed, right? We can still have an open ecosystem, but still converge on this, richer protocols with the metadata and stuff. And those, I think that is, to me, is very exciting. And this is something that we have started seriously thinking about. What do we do there? Should we just en masse adopt Iceberg? Does it really scale to this million QPS end of the spectrum? I don't know. Should we just extend iMetastore? Should we build something brand new that has all of these properties that can actually compete with Snowflake, for example? So not really. I mean, this ecosystem, I feel that is a cornerstone of building a truly competitive big data ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the interesting thing is the large internet companies see it one way, right? But when you have a 3-person data platform engineering team, you see it very differently, and you just want it to work out of the box. And so, from an Ahana perspective or a cloud services perspective, anything that takes just the query engine, you absolutely then need to say, okay, do I use bring up an instance just for the Hive metastore, or do I connect to Glue? Right? Which one, or both? And some of the design choices that we've had to make are both, because there are advantages of the cloud services, obviously, because a lot of these cloud services may already be used by end users. But then there's a beauty of having a managed metastore that a service is just taking care of for you, and you can build optimizations on top of that, which is what we are looking at. We just upgraded to Hive 3 as an example, so that we could leverage some of these capabilities in Presto, which don't exist, add DDL for it, or add additional support for it, and optimize on top of it. But I think the flexibility of it for smaller teams that are not Facebook, Uber, Twitter, that is important, and one of the things that solves it is a managed service. And somebody had a question earlier about, let me scroll up here, around Kubernetes, right? Because we are looking at Presto it's great. It's in some ways it's a stateless engine that can run. It can be run in a containerized environment. For many of the managed services, they run on Kubernetes, some flavor of Kubernetes. And so the specific question around official support for perhaps an operator or a Kubernetes controller. Are you, Bishwa and Girish, are you using Kubernetes much with Presto at the moment, and any plans around that?
No, not really. I mean, Facebook has its own Kubernetes. Like we run on Tupperware. There's actually a paper on Tupperware which was released last year. We also have the thing called Kronos, which essentially is kind of, think of it as a Yarn equivalent. That is good for bin packing lots of small tasks at a per worker level. This is what we use for Spark, right? We don't currently have plans to adopt Kubernetes. I don't think so, but I'm really excited about the ability for Presto to run on different container management systems. I do know some of the old Kubernetes folks from Google days, like the Borg, right? Folks, and Borg is just freaking awesome, right? So if we can get something like Borg in the open source ecosystem, I think it would be a very powerful thing.
Anything else to add, Dave or Girish?
Yeah, so from Uber side, we also have platforms we've built internally similar to Kubernetes. So we have a stateless job management or application management platform and a stateful one. And we're currently trying out Presto on both. But interestingly, at Uber, we are also considering looking at Kubernetes as we think of moving more and more of our compute into public cloud. And I'm pretty excited to try out Presto on Kubernetes. It might happen more on like the H2 timeline, but it's definitely something on the horizon for us.
Yeah, as I architected the service, we for Presto runs on EKS, and so for all customers that are on using Ahan actually are just running natively on EKS. They don't even know it, and that's the way it should be, where the underlying operating system essentially is a detail, right? And the rest of it is orchestrated. But we are looking at a Kubernetes operator to just have more multi-cloud, and we'll be open. Whatever we come up with will be open source. So we'll share more along the way later in the year. Let's move on to the last question, which is really about the future of Presto. And Biswa, you have a State of the Union talk a little bit later in the day to go into. Everyone's been waiting for, what is that? But maybe spill the beans a little bit for us in this session, just a teaser on what is coming. Girish and Dave, what are you excited about in the next 6 months? Right, we meet again in September at the big PrestoCon event, which will hopefully, maybe, perhaps in person. We'll see how it goes. Fingers crossed. But what is it that you want to get done in the next six months, and what does the future of Presto look like?
6 months. Well, in my talk later, I think I'll talk a little bit about the next 6 years, but we'll cover a bit of the next 6 months as well. Immediate term, as I said, I think some of the things that we are coming down the line. One is that things like speculative execution and partial result streaming and things like that, which will make interactive space even better. We've got fragment result caches and all kinds of very interesting things on the interactive space. Presto and Spark getting more mature is something I'm really excited about, because this finally gives people a way to write their query once and just run it anywhere, whether it's a dashboard. In fact, one very exciting thing that this is unfortunately internal, that we are actually putting the same language on streaming as well. So we are doing this project called Core SQL. I'll talk a little bit about that, which basically takes Presto SQL and adds a bunch of streaming graph, rich types, and other extensions, and makes that kind of the lingua franca for people who have come from Google. I think Google SQL, which is open source as SQL, kind of is trying to achieve very similar goals. And I'm excited about that kind of maturing in the next 6 months, right? I think Velox, a lot of people have been asking me, I'll talk a little bit in our C++ native accelerator story. I feel that is going to hopefully land in the next 6 months, at least for some initial workloads. I'm excited about that. And also just the scale stuff, like things like Fireball and Presto-Py. I think Tim talked about Fireball, or Swapnil talked about Fireball.
Swapnil will be talking about it.
Oh, okay. Just scaling Presto to larger and larger cluster and elastic resources and those kind of things, right? We have a bunch of things in flight that we expect to land in the open source and internally over the coming 6 month-ish time frame. Especially, I think Fireball is something I'm really, really looking forward to, because that will, I think, be a game changer in terms of high availability and elastic clusters and large clusters and things like that.
Awesome. Fireball equals multiple coordinators or disaggregated coordinators. Yeah. For those who aren't familiar with the project name, the code name. Dave, what are you looking forward to in terms of the future of Presto, and what do you have on your mind?
Yeah, exactly. So Biz was going to outline a pretty compelling technical roadmap that they're driving. I think the most interesting thing to me is the next-gen native worker and all the surrounding the new native Hive connector and all the work around that. So that more than likely will give up to an order of magnitude performance improvement over the next, however, 12 to 18 months or however long it takes. So we're specifically at HANA, I have like 4 or 5 open headcount that are looking to hire into those projects to try to help accelerate that part of it. So that's how excited I am about it. So we actually want to help them and help accelerate that work. So as you pointed out, so it's not just performance too. It's Dipti, you pointed this out earlier. It'll help eliminate the GC storms and the out of memory by allowing spilling and proper large query evaluation techniques for sorting and hashing, which is pretty out there. From from the HANA perspective, I mentioned earlier all the integrations, the public cloud bent, improved price performance. We have a pretty strong query optimization team. We're going to try to be really benchmark driven, and so run a lot of industry benchmarks like TPCDS, for example. Like Snowflake publishes that they can run 100 terabyte TPCDS in 3 hours on X size cluster. What can we do? What can Presto do? In this open environment, right? So I think we're going to put a big focus on industry benchmarks and query optimization and distributed query execution techniques to help drive performance there. We'll commit all this back to open source. I'm sort of scratching around the surface of like data science meets database capabilities now that I'm on the cloud. So I want to sort of leverage machine learning and observation and AI and machine learning techniques to sort of, help solve the auto configuration, auto tuning, workload optimization, and other such improvements. So I'm talking to one of my old colleagues from Aster Data Systems, who's a really good data scientist, to start figuring out what we can do there. So I think there's going to be like the next 12 to 18 months is going to be super, super exciting for Presto to be in so many dimensions.
That's great. Girish, any last comments?
Yeah, so from Uber side, we're looking at 3 major areas. So one is the Presto ecosystem stuff I was talking about, the Presto on Flink, Presto on Pinot, Presto on Spark, that kind of stuff. So obviously more investments there, hopefully more workloads running on those kind of configurations. The second thing is we're also trying out, like I mentioned, Presto on public cloud. So Kubernetes, Google Cloud, that kind of stuff. So this gives us elasticity, which we usually don't get with our on-prem systems, right? So if your peak load, you can always spin up a cluster very quickly on Google Cloud and can take some of your load. So we're trying that out. It sounds pretty exciting to us right now. And then the third area is actually pretty interesting. I think something we didn't touch on too much in this panel, but I feel is fundamental, right? So there's 2 ways you can optimize your query. One is you can optimize the engine, and the second is you can optimize the data, right? And the way you optimize the data is basically you look at the queries that people are running, and then you reformat your data in a way that those queries run faster. So for instance, you could have sample tables of your huge fact tables, or you could resort your data in a different way. You could aggregate kinds of like statistics in your footer files, and that will speed up your queries, certain classes of queries. So that's another area, data layout optimization. That's an area we are heavily investing in. So hope to see some of that work.
We should talk about this offline.
Yeah.
Hey, we say that every time. One more thing, Girish, that came up with Uber is secondary indexing, and that I think is very interesting as well. Just auxiliary data structures that up until now we've depended on the Parquet and ORC and the metadata that's essentially within the format itself. And is there other ways that it could where auxiliary data structures, like depending on there's so many different ways of indexing, would help as well. And so that's something I think the community has been asking for as well. All right. Well, we've had we're just on time, frankly, and so thanks so much, Bishwa, Girish, Dave. Always a pleasure. Thank you for your insights, and and we'll see Bishwa. We'll see you later in the day. Back to you, Amit.